Hello, welcome to Meet the Music. I'm Tom Corley, the host. And this week is going to be kind of a different twist for myself because I am speaking with someone who's a cognitive psychologist, a senior lecturer at the Cardiff Metropolitan University. But the thing about this conversation that we're about to have is in totally unfamiliar territory. And this genre of music is metal. Dr. Nick Perham is our guest this week, and he's going to share some things with us in regards to the metal music or metal genre of music. And so let's get started. So Dr. Perham, what was the reason, and I would say what the reason is, but how, why, how did metal become your thing?
Okay, well, I suppose with most people, if you're into a genre of music, you end up getting into it probably around your kind of childhood years, your teenage years, and it was kind of the same for me. So I'm coming up to 50 this year. So in sort of late 70s, early 80s, I was my musical influences then I was interested in were things like bands like The Police, British bands like Adam and the Ants, Blondie, and some more other British bands early 80s like Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And then I had a friend who was sort of into metal, was trying to get into metal. There were a few of us, and one of our
It's always that
there's always
friend.
one friend, isn't there? And the funny thing was that he was getting into metal and he would bring in his tapes and say, listen to this. And me and my friend would go, no, we don't want to listen to that. We want to listen to Pet Shop Boys. So we put something on that's a lot more poppy and into that. But at the same time, in the last year or two before that, I didn't realise I'd been listening to other music that was more rock orientated. So a friend recorded Queen, The Works for me, so I remember listening to that lots. My uncle gave me a copy of ZZ Top Eliminator. I remember listening to that lot. So I was kind of primed listening to sort of rock music at that point, or a little bit at least. So when my friend was bringing in all this music, and me and my other friend said, no, we don't want to listen to that. We want something a lot lighter. I was kind of obviously in the mood for that kind of music. So getting to about 1985, 86, I think there was an AC/DC song released called Who Made Who. And I listened to that, and I thought, that sounds good. I bought that on record. And then Bon Jovi became big with a song called You Give Love a Bad Name. And it was the time when Run DMC collaborated with Aerosmith on their song Walk This Way. So I remember seeing the Bon Jovi song and the Run DMC song, well, it was an Aerosmith song. And I thought, well, I like the sound of that, and bought those two records. And then from that, I bought a Bon Jovi album. I think I bought a Europe album. And then when you go into school at that age, you kind of share albums with friends and say, well, I've got this album, do you want to borrow it? And some other friends gave me another tape. There's always other friends, as you said. So the music became slightly heavier. I got into, was given bands like Def Leppard and the Scorpions. And then someone gave me Metallica. And this is my Metallica t-shirt, you might be able to see there. They were the kind of heaviest thing I'd listened to at that point. And at that age as well, once I got, for a lot of people, once you like a band, you end up searching out their back catalogue as well. So when I liked Bon Jovi, I went to the shops and find records on Bon Jovi. So you end up building a knowledge of the music you were getting into. So Metallica, I looked at their early albums, got into those. And then I had one of my friends who lived about 10 doors away, was getting into metal as well. So I'd go around his house and we'd share music, and gradually my knowledge of this genre of music expanded. And also at the time, there are plenty of magazines out there as well, general music magazines. And the famous ones for metal are Kerrang and Metal Hammer. And I bought one of those in about 1986. And then for about 5 years, I think, 1986 to about 1991, I was immersed in anything that was in those magazines. So whatever came into those magazines, I would try to check out, try to find some of my friends who were interested in it, share albums, then go to concerts, bought loads of T-shirts. So for a good 5 years, 14 to 19 years of age, I was immersed in metal music. And that's kind of my starting point, and it's kind of stayed with me ever since, despite me liking other songs and others from different genres of music. Metal and being a metalhead is kind of one of the things that stayed central to me, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things in there I wanted to touch on. One being vinyl.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Is that the only way you listen to it these days?
No, I can't remember the last time I listened to. I've got all my all my vinyls in the shed somewhere. If you're anything like me, you just hoard things as you get older. And I've got rid of some tapes, but I've got about 2,000 CDs. The other thing, once you're into genres of music, I can spend an hour just looking at my CDs with just trying to decide what to put on. And I won't choose anything, but I'll just sit there and I'll look at the covers. I'll remember when I bought it. I remember how old I was. It just brings back so many memories.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful. Yeah. If anything, doing the research for this and diving in, the artwork on the covers are just phenomenal.
There can be. Yeah, there's some. There's a book I bought recently about artwork called Art. I can't remember what it's called now. It's a play on the "And Justice for All" title of a Metallica album, and there were 3 volumes of it. And the author got in contact with the artists and the bands to discuss how they came about with the artwork and some background to the albums as well. And you're right. Sometimes when I went to choose when I thought I've got some money in my pocket, it's burning a hole in my pocket. I need to buy an album. Sometimes I was influenced more by the cover than anything else with the band. So there was an album I'd seen a picture of by a band called White Zombie. I think the title was Last Sexual Sister, Devil Music Volume 1. And it was a cartoon kind of cover. And I thought, I want that album. I hadn't heard the band before, and I bought the album. And that's sometimes a way you end up finding new genres of music or types of music.
Right. So are you a liner notes kind of a guy?
I used to be. Yeah, I used to sit there. I'd love the liner notes with the lyrics, so you could sing along. Especially with metal, when the lyrics are sometimes, or quite often, undecipherable when you're listening to more extreme metal. I also used to read the band's. The band members would give thanks to people, and I'd read that, and they'd be thanking other artists as well, which is quite interesting because I'd see who they were influenced by. I loved reading just recording an album wasn't enough. I like to buy the original.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So you mentioned, I guess, a couple of American bands. What about the British invasion of that, or?
Well,
when did you get to like Judas Priest and?
Judas Priest, yeah. I think that's probably about 87 or so. One of my friends was into Judas Priest, so the first album I had by there was Priest Live, I think. Judas Priest was an odd one. I kind of had this conception, or this perception at the time, they were a little bit more extreme and heavy than I thought. And then when I listened to them, I thought, no, it's quite accessible, it's easy. So there's a whole, lots of bands that can be sound very aggressive, and even the imagery and everything, and Judas Priest kind of had that. And for some people, that attracts people to it. And I thought, well, I'll keep away from that a little bit. And then I heard it and thought, wow, this is really good. And suddenly I was into Judas Priest as well. But British bands, lots. Def Leppard was my first concert I ever went to. So they're an English band. So in '87, I saw Def Leppard, supported by an American brand, Tesla. So I was, and Iron Maiden were probably still one of the biggest metal bands around, going for a good 40 years now. I was very aware of them. Motorhead. And then you've got the origins of heavy metal, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, from the 60s and 70s. So yeah, I was definitely aware of those.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I was in the United States Navy, and I was aboard a ship out in the Pacific, and we were headed to. Well, it was just getting ready to do a tour of the Pacific Islands and stuff like that, Philippines, things like that. And I remember distinctly, the soundtrack, I would say, for that summer was Def Leppard in '88.
Hysteria.
Yeah.
That's one of the albums I chose. It's an extremely accessible album, I think. If you're into kind of general pop music, it's kind of light, keyboardish, kind of lush production. Def Leppard's Hysteria is very, very much like that. Very good.
Yeah. So what was a spark for you to, take your intellectual piece and then dive into writing something about the connection?
I suppose my research as a cognitive psychologist mainly is to do with auditory distraction, basically about how sound affects performance. And I was supervising some students in about 2009, 2010, and one student was interested in looking at genres of music and how that affected performance. And I kind of ruled it out and thought, well, from what I know, it doesn't matter about the genre of music. It's more to do with what we call acoustical variability and how that affects performance. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I found some literature out there that suggests listening to music that you like improves performance. And I thought, well, that doesn't fit with the research I've done. So we conducted some research and we published it. So from the basis of that paper from 2010, I had lots of sort of emails and contact asking me about my research, and the music we used for Dislike Music was a band called Death Angel and a song called Thrashers. And we use that as an example of Dislike Music because, as you're probably aware, most people tend not to like metal. It's one of those genres. If you listen, if you ask people what music do you hate, most people would say metal, for lots of different reasons, I imagine. So we use that.
If you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said country. Yeah, but I love country music now.
Anything with guitars and drums and bass, kind of anything along the spectrum is great with me. And then a few years ago, there's a conversation, which is where I wrote this piece. I think I'd read something that lots of people have this perception of metal and people who like that music as being very aggressive. And a similar question to, does playing violent video games make you violent? And the idea, does listening to aggressive music make you aggressive? So I had a little search around to some of the articles out there that have done research on this and found, well, that's definitely not the case. It wasn't the case in my experience or people I know, and it wasn't the case in much of this research. So I wrote a short piece, and that's the piece that you picked up from the conversation article.
Yeah. And oddly enough, you said it was 10 years ago that it was done, and there's still people feeding off of that research that you did. There's stuff out there from 2019, 2020, 2021.
I think people are very interested in how music can be used to help performance, and because we all love listening to music, and many times we put music on whilst we're doing that music, and lots of people would suggest that that's not a good thing to do, and some people suggest, well, I really work well with music on the background. So that's kind of the research I'm looking at. It's not particularly about music, but it's moved over into music, and that's where I've had lots of contact from people.
Yeah. So, what do you think the spin-off of metal? With heavy metal, you have all these different subgenres of music that come off of it. Like you have in different countries also. I mean, Indonesia has heavy metal band and Japanese heavy metal, and I mean you've got all these different versions of heavy metal, and then you've got I had a list here. Gothic, black metal, progressive metal, trap metal. I mean, what's your take on all of that?
When I was younger, so when I was into it, sort of mid-'80s, there weren't so many genres and subgenres. You kind of had the classic rock from early 70s, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, the origins of heavy metal, I suppose. And then you've got and then in the late 70s, you got the new wave of British heavy metal. So you've got bands like Diamond Head, Tigers of Pantang, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, sort of those kind of bands. They influence American music as well. You've got sort of glam and hair metal, they call it, in the 80s. So I was into lots of that music. Despite what my hair might look like at the moment, I did have long hair once upon a time. I had the stereotypical mullet as well, short on the side, long at the back. Probably banged my head too much, that's why it fell out, I don't know. So I was into kind of the kind of glam and hair metal. And then I was into the heavier music around that time, which they called thrash metal, which were bands like Metallica. And then, as I said, because I was reading all the magazines, I kind of soaked up all of them. So I wasn't really thinking about genres. If they recommended an album, I'd go and search for it. So I was into, you got more extreme music towards the end of the late 80s, what they call death metal. Bands like Obituary, Repulsion. And then in the 90s, I went to university. Wasn't into metal quite so much, or wasn't immersed in it quite so much. I was made friends with other people who were into other genres of music, and I listened to other genres a bit more. So my kind of immersion in metal isn't quite so much as it was when I was a teenager. I obviously don't have anywhere near as much time as I did back then. But nowadays, there are many, many more genres than the ones I've just spoken about. And the ones you've just listed are a small proportion. And I think if we discussed this with someone who was into metal of a much younger age, they would kind of query definitions in different genres and say, well, that band isn't that particular genre, it's more of this particular genre. There's a lot of debate about, in a sense, what even is metal. I mentioned about the origins of metal. People say, is it Led Zeppelin, or are they more too folk orientated? Is it a band like Blue Cheer, or lots of some of the late 60s songs as well? I mean, Ray Davies from the Kinks. So the sound of the actual guitars came from, people say the origin came from that kind of one of You Really Got Me as well. So I think there's lots of definitions and whole lots of debate that people have about that. But I welcome all these subgenres. I think it's fascinating. And I love all the different sounds. And I think nowadays, we mentioned that one of the most extreme genres of music is called sort of death metal and black metal. And it sounds really aggressive, and I suppose early on it was. But nowadays it seemed to be kind of mixed with lots of other more accessible sounds. So you've got lots of sort of black metal bands who are very orchestral, lots of keyboards, steeped in kind of Scandinavian mythology and things. There isn't. I mean, the vocal style is quite heavy. It's quite strange, sometimes undecipherable at the time. But it's also very atmospheric as well. Bands like Opeth as well, kind of very acoustic, and they mix different vocal styles. So some they call clean vocals, very melodic, mixed with very harsh, gruff, guttural sounds. And so it's a lot more genres than I remember, and subgenres when I was a lot younger.
Yeah. Well, I have here that, my listeners get tired of me talking about this Spotify website. It's called Every Noise. If you go there, there's like 5,112 different genres and subgenres of music. And so when you type in the word metal, you come back with 361 different versions or something that's attached to metal. Now, to give you a threshold or a marker, rock, if you type that in, is 388. If you type in pop, it's 470. If you do jazz, it's like 137. If you do classical, it's 136. So it goes on. And then you have rap metal, which is 5. 5 different, So doing this podcast, I come across people, and we've had this conversation about the fusion of different sounds and how they expand a genre to another subgenre. And when you mentioned some of the different sounds that are related to the younger listeners now, they're being influenced, or the artists are kind of being influenced by electronic sounds, the EDM kind of format thing. I'm starting to see that in some of the different platforms of music where people are touching on that kind of area. But when you think of the variations of this style of music, what do you appreciate by it? Because right now, when I listen to it, I hear an opera type of a thing, and it's a symphony. Some of these songs, when I listen to them, it's a slow start and it's a build up, and then it's just a hard at it, go at it thing. And I appreciate that, listening to it that way. It gives me, I don't know, I enjoy it. That's how I enjoyed some of the metal I listened to. I was like, wow, this is just so heavy and so deep. It just takes you on a ride. It takes you on just like a little journey.
Yeah, I mean, I find it fascinating, and it's an interesting way to get into another genre of music you ordinarily might not listen to. So one sort of thing I remember, so one of my friends was into metal. We buy records at the same time. It's a band called Slayer, and a band called the album Rain and Blood. And I remember there was lots of publicity about it, and it was part of the publicity was that it was being produced by Rick Rubin, who was famous then for producing Def Jam records and Beastie Boys, more rap-orientated music. And lots of metal fans were like, no, how dare they trying to produce Slayer with a rap producer. Turned out to be one of the, arguably the biggest thrash album ever. And, I don't think anyone disliked it from the metal community. But my friend had it, and I remember listening to it a little bit and thought, I'm not sure really, it's a bit too heavy for me. And I remember writing the lyrics down for one song. And I kind of, in a way, wanted to get into it, and I almost forced myself to like it and listen to it a bit more. And gradually I did, and it was another example of listening to a band with more darker lyrics, more extreme vocal style, to get me into a more aggressive music. And then from there I listened to other music. And now when I listen to it, it's perfectly I can understand it much, much easier than I can other bands who, there really are some bands who literally you cannot understand the vocals at all. It is a guttural sound. It's like someone being sick sometimes, vomiting. And that's a genre and it's a style of, some people would debate whether it's a style of singing or not. But it's, I don't know how they can growl and use their vocals without damaging their vocal cords quite so much.
Yeah, I'm amazed by that also, constantly doing that. You'd be able to survive with a voice. But so let me ask you this question now. You mentioned having time to sit back and enjoy and kick back and enjoy it these days. So, how are the other people in your household? Are they fans, or are they like put your headphones on, or go in the car and listen to it, or what kind of household do you have?
It's my wife, and we've got three kids who are 11, 8, and 4. So, luckily, my wife, she's a kind of likes the same similar music. So, one thing we bonded over was a band called the Wild Hearts, who are a British band that we really love. So that was useful. That was very helpful.
Let me interject here. I stalked you, of course, on the internet, and I realized that's you and your wife's song?
Oh, sorry, yeah, we
had
that as our first song, One Life, One Love, One Girl. Yes. So
yeah. Actually, March 28th is your anniversary.
That's right. It was the other month. Yeah.
Okay, so that's my date of birth, March 28th. Yeah.
Well, that's a coincidence.
I'm sorry I interrupted.
That's all right.
But I needed to tell you that when I heard you say Wild Hearts, I said, what does that sound familiar? I said, oh, yeah, that's that song.
Yeah, so it's a great, we've seen them quite a few times as well. Yeah, what was the question?
No, I was asking you how is everyone else in the household?
That's right.
Do they appreciate it?
Yeah, so when the kids were a bit younger in the car, when we managed to get beyond nursery rhymes, we were allowed to put our own music on. I thought, well, no, let's try and brainwash them in from an early age. So I produced some rock music. So I think we had Kiss, some Twisted Sister. My boys quite like that. They're 11 and 8 now. So my eldest, who's 11, he still will listen to Kiss, but he won't say much about it. So that they're all now of the age that they don't want to listen to any music that we like. So that happens. The funny thing is that my boys play Fortnite a lot, and there's lots of music, imagery and music with that. And some of the imagery and music is related to things that I know. So suddenly I'll start singing a song that they've played and go, yeah, well, I know this. It's a rock song. They're like, no, I don't like that. But if it comes from Fortnite, it's fine.
Right. I like the philosophy of kind of get them caught up early, because that's what I did. And now my kids are band geeks. They play jazz, symphony, and marching band. And so, so I have no talent myself. What about you? Do you play this?
I had a guitar in about 1996, so that's almost 30 years later, and I can still play as little as I could back then. I really wish I could. The one thing I wish I could do is play the guitar. I love the guitar sound. I love the idea of playing a guitar and being able to sing along with it. I just can't do it. It's a lot of practice, isn't it?
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah, maybe I'll do it when I get to my retirement stage and learn how to play the piano. But yeah, speaking of the guitar, I mean, in a lot of these songs or bands, I mean, that guitar is kind of the next to the vocals. That's the thing.
That's the thing that you hear. Yes, I think if you the kind of more central definition of metal being aggressive, it's the guitar sound that kind of defines it. Alongside the vocals, and you can get very aggressive vocals, but vocals can be very lush and very melodic. But it's the heaviness of the guitar, and sometimes it's married with the heaviness of the lyrics. I mean, quite often there's some bands who write similar topics to most pop songs, like love and relationships and things like that.
Right. Would you argue that metal guitarists are the best?
As a non-musician, probably yes, I would. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, just from observation, from the naked eye, it's like they just tear that thing up, man. It's like crazy. Yeah. So you and I were at a dinner party, and you say, Thomas, what's your playlist? Instead of talking small talk and talking about the weather, you say, what did you play on what's on your playlist? And I'll tell you, house music, jazz, a little bit of country. And you'll say, have you listened to metal? And I'll say, no, I have never listened to metal, but I'm interested.
That's a good start.
So what would you, so where would you direct me to if I'm a new listener to metal?
I think for anyone wanting to get into metal, it's chances are most people aren't so familiar with the aggressive side of things, so you probably wouldn't jump in at the aggressive end. You probably want something a bit lighter, a little bit more melodic, to kind of build up to that. So we mentioned Def Leppard, the Hysteria album. I think that's a really good entry point because it's not too dissimilar to pop music. The topics are very similar. It's very It's a few ballads on there. It's very, very lush production. Some people argue overproduced, but it has that guitar element. Not too heavy. That's quite gentle, gentleish to get into. They are a lot heavier. They were a lot heavier when they started out. Fantastic band. My first band I ever saw. Another band I mentioned, the Wild Hearts, that my wife and I really enjoy. I think they described themselves as being they wanted to have cross Beatles with Metallica, which I thought was incredible because Beatles and Metallica are arguably my two favourite bands, and Wild Hearts became up there with my favourite bands as well. So they had an album, their first album called Earth versus the Wild Hearts, which is brilliant, really interesting lyrics, written in the early 90s, a lot about being kind of living in London, living, not having much to do, lounging around, not having much direction in life, but really up-tempo, melodic, sing-along, but heavy guitars as well. So those are kind of two, I suppose, lighter points I would suggest to get into. And then leading on to, I would say, my favourite album ever, not just metal album, but favourite album ever, and this is a t-shirt I'm wearing, Metallica, Master of Puppets. So this released in about 1986. They are the kind of originators, people say, of thrash metal, which is a kind of, I suppose, my favourite genre of music. And it was their biggest album. It wasn't the biggest seller. They became much bigger in sort of 88 and in 91 when they released the Black Album that everyone's very, very familiar with. Nothing Else Matters, Enter Sandman. But I think Master of Puppets, it's their best album. It's the one with the classic four members on there with Cliff Burton's last album. And it's fantastic. It's got that heaviness. It's got the acoustic side of things. The lyrics are a bit darker than your typical metal music. It's more to do with social issues and worldwide issues. I remember getting that on tape and listening to it constantly, and was so pleased eventually when I bought it on album. I bought it on vinyl, and I remember it skipped at one point, and every time I hear a song that it skips in, I can still hear the skip as I hear it. I'm expecting the skip because I heard it so many times. So those would be three ones. Another classics I mentioned before, Slayer, Rain in Blood, released I think just after Master of Puppets, and then arguably again the kind of the best thrash album ever. And I think that's a kind of gateway if you can cope with that speed and the sound of the guitars and the gruffness of the vocals, that would lead you into more heavier music where those vocals are a bit more prominent, and the songs become faster. And they slowed down, I think, about the one or two albums after that as well. They couldn't kind of keep up that pace. They wanted to do something slightly different, but they still maintain that heaviness as well. And then the final one I would say would be Nirvana, Nevermind. I think that was that came from more of a punk influence, an independent music influence, but still had that global reach that it's one of the last, I suppose, rock genres or rock albums that turned music on its head. And arguably, people say it kind of was the kind of final nail in the coffin for what they called hair metal, glam metal at that point. So I think I mentioned Def Leppard, Wild Hearts, Nirvana, kind of more of a gentle introduction. If you want something a little bit heavier, Metallica and Slayer, kind of classic, I think.
Yeah. So what about artists of the 2000s and later? Have you found anybody you like in that?
I have, not quite as much as we was discussing. It's a bit more tricky when you're a bit older and have a job to do, and then when you're a parent as well. You just can't sit around and sit there, watch your vinyl go around for an hour and listen to it again and again and again as you would do when you were younger. But I did. I suppose the last two albums, or the last two artists that really hit me, that made me go and seek out the back catalogue and made me want to read the liner notes, were Slipknot in '99. So they released it was their second album and their first album with the current main lineup, and Tool, who've been around since the early 90s. So Slipknot were kind of an example of what they called new metal. So they like coming up with subgenre names. So this was a kind of mixture of lots of different influences from, say, late 80s like Faith No More, bands like Korn in the early 90s, and kind of incorporating a slight dance element to it as well. It's been trashed since, which is quite annoying because I think the music from those genres is brilliant. There's some brilliant bands out there, brilliant albums, brilliant singles. But I think Slipknot was the one that best encapsulated, and 20 years later they're still as popular and prominent as ever. And then Tool are just different again. I think they're kind of classed as more progressive metal. They take a long time producing their albums, The last album was released about 2 years ago, and that was about 10, 15 years from the one previous to that. But when you listen to the intricacies, I mean, if you're a musician, I think bands like Tool are something that you would gravitate towards. They have, I'm learning things about music. They have different time signatures, and I'm not a musician. I'm not aware of time signatures that much. But you listen to that, and I watch videos about it, and you think, my God, how do they remember these time signatures? So intricate. The drumming, the guitar sound. So again, that's a different sound to the ones I've mentioned. So that's an album called Lateralis, I think is amazing. And then I got into a much lighter band in the sort of late, about 2010 or 11, just after my first son was born, a band called Against the Current. So they're kind of very up to date. I think they started off by covering lots of Taylor Swift songs. Lead singer, she fantastic voice. They're a trio band. And their music isn't that heavy. They've done, I think, 3 albums now. But the first album, In Our Bones, is the one we listened to lots. We listened to it in the car when we used to go on a holiday. And it's got a kind of, it's very well produced and lush sound as well, similar to Def Leppard in that sense. But it's a nice entry point of a kind of a new band. And then another band that was big in the early 2000s, which follows on from, I suppose, the kind of classic rock and glam metal from the 80s, was a band called The Darkness from the UK. I don't know, have you heard of The Darkness? No. So they came out in about 2000, 2001, I think. They're still around. They've done quite a few albums now. But their first album called Permission to Land was very big. They got a classic song, brilliant song called I Believe in a Thing Called Love. If you're like me and you can't play the guitar and you decide to do the air guitar instead, that's a brilliant song to do the air guitar. And if I had hair, I'd bang around a little bit more to that one. And the lead singer, Justin's got he's got a deep pitched voice, but he can also hit the high notes similar to Freddie Mercury. And his high notes would be really, really high, so he uses that a lot. So that's a kind of, if you're more into kind of the lighter, just more general rock music, that's a good one to get into. And a final band I noticed a kind of style of music I wasn't quite so familiar with in the 2000s come out called metalcore, which has the kind of heaviness of the guitars that I was into from thrash metal, some of the darker lyrics as well, but the vocals again became very gruff, very raw, sort of indecipherable, but it was mixed with what they call clean vocals. So you had very melodic vocals, and then at certain points, sometimes you had the same vocalist doing the 2 different styles, sometimes you had dual vocalists. And I kind of got into that a little bit more as well. So there's quite a few bands of that genre and that ilk out there. And a band I will mention here, who are an Australian band called Parkway Drive. And this is a band that one of my students was recommending to me a few years ago. And I checked out a few of their songs, and they're really good. They're heavy sound, but they've got that mixture of clean vocals, which can kind of bring someone into it who's not so familiar with the rough vocals. And then you've got the kind of rough vocals alongside, more prevalent on other songs as well. So there's a good few bands, Against the Current, Darkness, Slipknot, Tool, Parkway Drive. There's some sort of good classic or new classics out there as well to check out, I think.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that list because, like I said, it's this whole show is about introducing people to different genres of music, and in order to do that, you got to have somebody who appreciates it,
definitely.
And who won't feed you a bunch of minutia when it comes to the commercial side of music. And so I appreciate you taking the time to do that list for us. So on the live side, I mean, going out to, well, it's probably been a while since you did that too. But so what was your greatest experience at a concert? Or who gave you the best memories, I guess.
My first one, I suppose, part that sticks in my mind. So Tesla and Def Leppard. And Def Leppard and the Hysteria album, one of my favourite albums ever. Def Leppard, one of my favourite bands ever. And obviously being my first gig. And the Tesla album, it's their first album, Mechanical Resonance. That's a brilliant album. So that sticks in my mind partly because it's the first first concert, and partly because both bands are fantastic. I went to Donington, so you've heard of, obviously, Monsters of Rock festivals. So Donington was the famous one in the UK. It's now Download's the famous one now, but I went to Donington in 1988. This is where, sadly, 2 fans were killed in the crush while Guns N' Roses were playing. I think I was in that crush at that point when it happened. I felt the surge, and then I just turned around and managed to push my way out again. But I didn't realise until the next morning, by the time I got home, that two fans had died because of that. But that was an amazing experience. I was, I think 16 at the time. I went with my friend on the coach, travelled up there. So yeah, that was one of the first ones. And then seeing Metallica. You know, they are my all-time favourite band. I've only seen them twice. But that was a fantastic experience to see them. Just to see the band that you kind of grew up with, that you worship, and then you see them live on stages. You know, I'm sure everyone's experienced that if you've been to a gig.
Right, yeah. Yeah, my first concert my mom took me to, and I have to think it was Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Cool.
If I can, yeah. And it was a fantastic experience, and we were fortunate enough to have a good position where I could see everything going on, the intricacies of the band, and having a band that size.
Yeah.
Your eyes are just traveling all over the stage.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, you were in the seat. You were in the seats looking down at me. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Off to the side
okay.
also of the stage, not directly in the front, or anything like that. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting point because I'm only 5'6", and although I used to be quite tall for my age when I was younger, I stopped growing and everyone else overtook me. And so going to concerts is a kind of double-edged sword. I like to see live bands. I want to see the bands I really like, but most of the time I can't see them. I'm stuck behind people unless I'm at on the side somewhere. So I remember seeing Slipknot at the big venue in Cardiff where I live, and I managed to be. Eventually I was about a few feet from the front, but I still couldn't see much. And Slipknot have 9 members in the band, and I barely saw 1 or 2 of them at a time. And I ended up spending most of my time in a kind of jostling position with a guy who was a lot taller than me and sweatier than me, just so I could try and see something. So a lot of my experience of going to gigs aren't actually seeing the band. It's more the experience of being there and trying to stand on tiptoes and peer in.
Right. Yeah. No, and at this point in my life, because I'm just a few years older than you are, and I don't think I could take standing.
I find I take earplugs. I put earplugs in now as well to make sure I could take no damage.
Yeah, right. So,
and it's quite.
Well,
I was going to say it's quite strange going to a gig now and seeing people all my age as well. People who about 20 years ago would have flowing locks and they've all got kind of shaven heads and hardly any hair like me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the case for me. My daughter, she's a DJ, and we go and see her every once in a while. And it's funny because the music she grew up listening to with me, she's playing that now in some of her sets. And I see a lot of people my age, and then I see another generation of people coming up listening to it. And so, it's just interesting because she's a techno house DJ. Yeah. All right, sir. Well, I appreciate your time.
That's okay.
Are you social media?
I am on social media. I am on Twitter somewhere. I think just under Nick Perham there.
And your handle is?
I think it's Nick Perham, actually, or Perham Nick. It might be Perham Nick, actually. If people want to find me on there.
Okay. Because, we'll have people search you out and also search out some of your articles.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.
Okay.